Hi, I'm Jeff Nyquist, and this is another edition of Friends and Enemies, where we talk about the primary political distinction, which is the distinction of friend from enemy. My co-host Alex Benesch is in Germany. I'm in the United States. And of course, we have a lot to talk about this week. There was a meeting in NATO. Since we last spoke, we were hours before Trump bombed Iran, and we've got the aftermath of that. So, Alex, what do you think of this NATO meeting where Trump seemed to get what he wanted, and the Secretary General of NATO called him Daddy? I mean, what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, I don't think anybody is supposed to understand it. I know nobody is supposed to really get it. Nobody is supposed to see what only a few people can see, right? So, I mean, I said before, Trump, I think, is supposed to be hard to read, and sometimes he seems very predictable because of that self-centeredness, and he always wants to be the best and have the biggest and the greatest, whatever. But also, when you have a personality like Trump's, these people, they like to play their part in a sophisticated ruse. You know, they like to be ahead in terms of a team, of course, because Trump is not, he's not running everything. There's lots of people in government that do things. But when there's a secret operation to bomb Iran, and when Trump says in public, I'm thinking about it, within the next 2 weeks, or within the next 2 weeks, I'm going to have some decision. And then boom, there it is. The attack happens, and everybody's surprised. And, government is bragging, because they achieved something, something significant, they say. They make the Russians look weak so far by extension. And then this, of course, NATO, NATO countries have agreed on 5% military spending, which sounds huge. We'll see how long it takes to get there, but it's like, it's like this. There's a glee in being obfuscating things and then surprising everybody, and then be part of that sort of surprise. So I think that's what we have to take into account. We talk about the Trump government now. The White House is bragging so hard. Like here on the official website, it says, in a defining moment for global security, President Donald J. Trump achieved a monumental victory for the United States and its allies, brokering an historic deal, always that language, to dramatically increase defense contributions across the NATO alliance, marking a new era of shared responsibility and strength against global threats. But it's not just the White House that's happy and bragging, right? It's they got all these comments on there. Widespread praise at home and across the world, it says on the White House website. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said, "Would you ever think that this would be the result of this summit if he would not have been re-elected president? I think he deserves all the praise." Wait a minute. He was the guy that said, "Oh, I don't know about NATO. It's stupid. We just might leave it. It's, we just have to pay for it all. It's stupid. And I don't care about Ukraine. I don't really like this whole thing. I wish it would all go away. And I don't like these Europeans. They're annoying." And it's just all this talk, and everybody just was so terrified. And then things started to move. Obviously, the United States could never pay for it all and do it all and deal with the Russians and the Chinese and then 5 other things. Of course, the Europeans had to step up. So it's like you can never really fully take anything at face value that is being said in public when it's about such important topics. There's always something behind it. It's always being said to create a certain effect at that moment, but there's so much more behind this. Then we have Finnish President Alexander Stubb, quote, "We're witnessing the birth of a new NATO. This is a big win, I think, for both President Trump, and I think it's also a big win for Europe." Polish President Duda, quote, "Without the support and without the leadership of Donald Trump, it would be impossible." Estonian Prime Minister Kristen Michal, "It's a historic moment that we will be ramping up defense expenditure to 5%. I strongly and Estonia strongly support it." And he goes on, Finnish Minister for Foreign Affairs, "I think he's exactly right when he says that Europe needs to spend more." European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas quote, allies seem to be united. I think the understanding is everybody needs to do more for defense because we're all living in very turbulent times. And it goes on and on and on. Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radoslav Sikorski, I think he was just at the Bilderberg conference. Quote, we should give credit where credit is due. President Trump was right in his first term when he said that allies were not fulfilling their own commitments from previous summits. Even CNN said, a diplomatic masterstroke. Politico, big win for Europe. Associated Press, Wall Street Journal, editorial board, quote, Trump wins the battle of NATO. Le Monde, Trump triumphant after NATO leaders agree on defense spending hike. Media from the Netherlands, Austria. Here, Netherlands, German media. And on and on and on. And then there's, of course, all these Americans that are being quoted and saying, yeah, this is finally happening. This is all great. And guess who's crying? Guess who's whining? You know, it's those people that claim to love Trump or, you know, benefited from the Trump hype. The truthers, the pro-Russian guys, some of the MAGA people, some of the other Tucker Carlson types and other types, they're whining now. It's like the mainstream media is saying, okay, good, great, finally, and international media and all these politicians from different countries saying, oh, great thing, super great. But then there's all these people that are whining now. It's all these people that are crying now. So, yeah, it seems a bit upside down, don't you think?
Yeah, it's upside down on purpose. I mean, to hear that the Prime Minister of Poland is actually praising Donald Trump is kind of funny. That Donald Tusk is praising Donald Trump. It's weird. And of course, I don't know the background of the president of Finland or but I saw his interview after the meeting, and he was very positive about what Trump had achieved. He credited Trump with getting the NATO countries to commit. Now, this commitment, by the way, to 5% spending is by 2035.
Yeah.
And it's easy to predict we're not going to get there. I mean, look at what Germany committed to, you know, more than 3.5 years ago when Ukraine was invaded. Germany was committing to what did they commit to? 3% or was it 2.5%? And I don't think they've reached 2% yet, have they?
Well, they can, you know, fudge the numbers, so to say. I mean, there's always some way to make the number bigger on paper or make it seem smaller. It's just like, it's Europe. You know, Europe is such a wild place. Everything is obfuscated. Everything is, you know, you're not supposed to read it. You're not supposed to really understand it because you can.
But the thing is that you know, Germany is the biggest economy in Europe, yeah. And if they were actually producing the same amount as America, let's say America is near 4% GDP spending, 3-point-something%. If they were at that percentage rate, they'd be a formidable military barrier to the Russians. But it's only Ukraine. The Ukrainians are sacrificing. The Ukrainian men are standing up at the front line. This giant Ukrainian shield of 700 and something thousand men holding back the Russians. And of course, the Russians, I think everybody's agreed that the Russians have passed the 1 million casualty mark recently. And I think back to all the people on talk radio and elsewhere that have assailed me saying that I was some kind of neocon, deep state, you know, evil person because I favored Ukraine and that Russia had really won and so on. And it was only NATO that was making war on Europe. I mean, when you see how little Europe has actually helped Ukraine and how much Ukraine has sacrificed as a small nation outnumbered, 3-1 in population by the Russians, and so many Ukrainians are living in Europe as refugees, the women, the children, the old folk.
Aren't we witnessing the destruction of what what a certain number of people have, what they have cultivated in their own heads and what they've told each other. There's only, the West and the neocons and the warmongering and blah, 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 blah. And so they're trying to repeat that stuff now.
What Moscow is
they're repeating that
heads.
now. They're repeating that now, but it seems so ridiculous now when they repeat it in a situation like this. It's like they lose so much credibility that had been artificially created, or some phony credibility that had been created during the Bush era.
It's funny what you learn is how little people lose credibility by being wrong over and over again, because when people are ideological, their connection to truth is like very narrow. They don't really have much of truth. And so what's happened here is a good example is Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who on day, I forget, it was like the first week or two of the war, maybe day 10, he said, this war is over in 10 days. This is in 2022. This was in early March 2022. He's saying this, that the war is over, Ukraine has lost, the Russians have smashed them. And of course, he said this over and over again. The war is lost. You're reinforcing defeat if you help Ukraine. You're just murdering Ukrainians. People are being murdered are the Russians by their own government and the way they use their forces. This horrible war, and all the same thing. All these people who believe that there's Nazis, that the Ukrainian government is a Nazi government. There's no Nazis in the Ukrainian government.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And the neo-Nazis in the Donbass, no. I mean, they're talking about that famous regiment that was raised by a couple of guys who were influenced by that movement. But the people that joined that unit were not Nazis. But it's a complicated. I read a very detailed scholarly paper on it. Ukraine's not a Nazi country, but what's interesting is that all these propagandists, they believe this, and that there was a coup in 2014. No, there wasn't. Read the history, read all the books, read the claims on both sides, read what's known and what's not known. It's not what happened. This is military aggression. So here we are, showing the credibility of all these people, Scott Ritter, Douglas Macgregor, Tucker Carlson. It's 3.5 years now we're going on in this war in Ukraine. We're headed for the 3.5-year mark. And Russia just keeps piling up the losses. In fact, I read this week that Ukraine is actually making significant gains in places where the Russian offensive towards Sumy was just smashed.
Yeah.
And they were bombarding Sumy. I mean, and they've been bombarding Ukraine. They're just wrecking these places. And we got to realize the savagery of the Russians. I've made this characterization before. The Ukrainians will attack bombers that are bombing their cities, sending missiles into their cities, and the Russians will respond by attacking apartments, apartment complexes, grocery stores, shopping malls, and gas stations. I mean, it's ridiculous. Civilian targets. I mean, because why? Because their weapons are so imprecise. They have to aim at a city and hope they hit something and kill people in the city, but not military.
But now for the rest of time, the historical record will say, well, I mean, NATO was so weak before, especially before 2022. There was nothing really going on in Germany, in Poland, Ukraine, all these countries were militarily so weak. Nobody put any money into it. Everything was falling apart in terms of militaries, and this was so much trade with the Russians.
And explain why did NATO weaken? Because they believed that Russia had turned over a new leaf and there was no more threat, and it was false.
And it's all on the record. It's all on the record, thousandfold. When all that stuff that happened, and then Ukraine became that militarily small country that could. Nobody believed in Ukraine, and they proved everybody wrong. Yes, they got equipment. Yes, they got some weapons and weaponry, but it wasn't even that much, right? I mean, this is also a historical record for the rest of time. all the hesitation in Europe. Maybe we'll send them some more, clothing and boots and stuff, and maybe some tanks, but maybe not, and maybe some old tanks, and maybe a few rockets, and maybe a little bit of this and that. That's all on the record. All of it is on the record forever. And so people are now, they're still trying to sell the same concept, the same idea that was floating around in the Bush years, in the 2000s, like 20 years ago. Like 20 years ago, the NATO is the big bully, and NATO is just or America is just bullying someone. But it's a completely different situation. It's a completely different ballgame. And I think that with this, in connection with the strikes against Iran, I mean, look at all the people that started whining. Look at all the people that started complaining and saying, this is just like the neocons. This is just like Bush. Trump is the same guy that Bush was, and we voted him in to have change, to have something different. But the world is a different place. Threats are different. I mean, the threats now, visible threats, are now completely different than back in the day and 20 years ago. And I think a lot of people, they weren't even adults back then. I mean, who was an adult in the 2000s, right? I mean, I was like 17 when 9/11 happened, so I was barely an adult when 9/11 happened, and then of course the Bush years. And I'm 40. I'm 41 now. I mean, there's like a whole bunch of people that never really lived consciously as an adult during the Bush years, and it's like, but they're still trying to run with this. But they're now faced with a president, Donald Trump, who is now flexing. He's taking on this leadership role, which is set back, or it's debatable, of course, they set back Iran's nuclear program. We've coordinated with the Israelis. This now NATO has agreed to actually spend money. People are understanding the threat now. There's a lot of bragging, but there's none of that what people said he was going to be. Like one group was saying Trump is going to be like this benevolent dictator who's going to arrest the deep state and save everything, next week. But that didn't happen. And the other group said Trump is going to be a negative, horrible dictator, and he's going to just, abandon all rule of law, blah, blah, blah. But now it looks like a fairly regular administration, right? They're dealing with Iran, coordinating with Israel, spending, they're just prepping for war in Asia. They're, NATO is spending more, and it's like, it seems very normal.
The logic of strategic situations can be very commanding. It doesn't matter what crazy thing you might want to do or vision you might have, but the strategic reality of China, the strategic reality of Iran, possibly blocking the Strait of Hormuz, possibly using a nuke on Israel, the reality of Russia threatening Europe, these realities, eventually you can fantasize about a alliance with Russia or about trade with China, and they'll always flirt with these things. But in the end, they're looking at the military tables. They're looking at the balance of power, especially the nuclear balance of power, and they're going, uh-oh, what is happening here? Why are they doing this? We had a similar, people would say we're at the beginning of Cold War II, but really it's a continuation. But let's say that it's a restarting of something, at least in our mind, of what had happened, started in the late 1940s. At that time, when we had the nuclear supremacy, people like Eisenhower, Churchill, John von Neumann, who was the father of game theory and a famous American physicist, they contemplated preemptive war on the Soviet Union. Now, Russia and China have a kind of preponderance of these weapons. Their conventional militaries are awful. They're big, but they're awful. But they have this preponderance. Are the Russians thinking of preemptively attacking us because they're so afraid of losing what they have? John von Neumann famously said about preemptive war, if you say why not bomb them tomorrow, I say why not today. If you say today at 5 o'clock, I say why not at 1 o'clock. Are there Russian generals and strategists saying this today? Are the Chinese saying this? As their economies slurp down the drain, as their conventional war in Ukraine goes badly, what really happened in Iran? Why was Iran and Israel in this war? Was it a Russian provocation? Did the Russians arrange a nuclear test in Iran, and Iran jumped at the chance to have an underground nuclear test that set Netanyahu on this course, that drew Trump into this bombing? And by the way, for those that want to believe CNN and National Public Radio and the New York Times that the strikes were ineffective, I mean, if you see the briefing on my website that was done by Lee Wheelbarger about the bombing, and I've heard from other sources too, they destroyed those complexes completely. And more than a dozen key scientists and engineers, nuclear scientists and engineers in Iran were killed in a very savage manner, by the way. I'm not going to color over that. The Israelis sent drones into these people's bedrooms to kill them when they're sleeping with their wives. This is terrible. But this is the ruthlessness of the fear that the Israelis have over these nuclear weapons.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the infrastructure needed to make a number of nuclear weapons. I mean, it's a whole production chain from mining uranium, then transforming it into uranium hexafluoride, and then putting them into these centrifuges and all that, and then just going step by step until you finally have nuclear warheads. I mean, it takes sophistication, it takes experts. It's hilariously complicated. I mean, the Manhattan Project had the best minds in the world working on it. I mean, it used to be the tube alloys project in Britain, and then they moved everything to the United States and had a pool of the best people to figure out the steps and also to ensure the quality of what they were making and to make it so you could pay for it, so it wouldn't spiral out of control. And the Iranians now, they have to have sort of like a makeshift. The Iranians now, they need to have like a makeshift atomic weapons program that's like always on the run. So you have to move. This is almost like when the Nazis were getting into real trouble in the later stages of the war, that the Nazis were figuring out new technology, the V2 rocket and some new supersonic, some jet engines and all kinds of weapons that could have changed the battlefield. But they constantly had to shift production because they had to move stuff underground, or they had to keep stuff moving because these factories or these facilities were being bombarded. And also to move things from A to B is risky. I mean, of course, you can have a facility under the bedrock, and it couldn't be touched necessarily directly by a bunker-busting bomb because you can't go through that much bedrock. But where are the entrances? Where's the entrances? Where's the power supply? Where's the the ventilation shafts? Where do people go in and out?
By the way, that's how they attacked. They attacked.
Yeah.
This is stupid. You won't believe this. And the Russians do this too. In their bunkers, their ventilation shaft is vertical straight up.
Dumb.
So if you drop a bomb down, one of those guided, glide bombs, and you stick it down that shaft, you can get through down into the bunker. And I understand the diameter of these ventilation shafts are wider than these bombs.
And also
is that incredible?
Yeah, and also, there's a facility has to have ventilation. There's got to be water. There's got to be electricity. Yeah. There's all kinds of stuff that needs to be just right. The frequency of the power supply. It has to run at a specific number of hertz cycles, and everything has to be precise when you're making something like nuclear weapons or plutonium or highly enriched uranium. So everything has to be just right. And so now Iran, they have to be on the run with the program. They have to do one bit over here, and they have to do another stage over there, and they have to move this over there. It becomes like a cat and mouse game, and it's very, very, very tough to have a program like this. Of course, Medvedev then went on social media and said, "Oh, screw that! We're gonna have some countries will supply Iran with nuclear warheads." That's what he said on social media, and he also almost gave like a confirmation of the legitimacy of a move like that. To attack these facilities, because Medvedev said something along the lines of, "Well, now I can say it. We can basically say openly that Iran really wanted to make nuclear weapons, but we're gonna give them some warheads. Some other countries will supply Iran with warheads." Yeah, well, that's another ballgame. When a situation like that arrives and there's espionage, obviously, everywhere. And so it's not as simple. It's not as simple as the Iranians probably thought. Now, pretty much after the attack, when a lot of people were mad and said, "We don't trust Trump anymore. We don't like him anymore. He's a neocon. He's like Bush, blah, blah, blah." Then Trump said in public, he's kind of annoyed with Israel, or he's frustrated with the Israelis, and they need to figure it out, and they shouldn't go overboard with this. And it's almost like it felt like a bit of a staged statement from Trump. I mean, it seemed like that to me, because it was perfectly suited to mollify the disappointed people out there. Some of the MAGAs, some of the conspiracy buffs, because they said Trump was just Trump was doing what the Israelis wanted him to do. Israel is running the U.S., blah, blah, blah. But then Trump said something along the lines of, no, I'm in charge here. I don't like everything the Israelis are doing. I get annoyed with them too, like I get annoyed with anybody. It seemed like...
Trump forced the Israelis to stop attacking Iran when the Israelis really wanted to have a regime change and continue bombing them. And Trump stopped it. And Netanyahu, because of his dependence on American help, he had no choice but to do what Trump said. So the idea, everybody has this, there's a fascinating thing that my Romanian colleague said to me a few years ago, actually 5 years ago. Anca Maria Cernea, brilliant Romanian doctor and analyst, really knows political things, Romania being a former East Bloc country. And she said, when talking about politics and talking about, the corruption, totalitarianism, communism, all the things that are going around today, and of course people have these conspiracy theories, she wrote this to me. "I think we shouldn't overlook another aspect of the situation. As we know, Russians run very complicated dialectical games, but sometimes, actually I think rather often, they lose control over events for many reasons. First, because no human is almighty. No human has complete control over reality, and that goes for the people who believe that the Jews control everything. And even those, or the capitalists or the banksters, and even those who have made a pact with Satan and thus think they can't lose up, end up being cheated. Very often, mafia partners get in conflict. Very often, they betray each other. They start fighting each other. They go each one for their own better interest. Complicated intrigues sometimes turn against those who have organized them. Wide social phenomena are not easy to manage. Once they have been triggered, they may take a completely different direction than the intended one. I think this was the case to a great extent with Perestroika, with the KGB plot to replace Ceausescu in Romania, with the Arab Spring that ended in extending to Syria, which of course the Russians couldn't have wanted. Probably not part of the plan. With the initially small rallies in Brazil that later became gigantic anti-PT rallies, they couldn't have expected this. Operating with lies and fraud all the time, like the Russians, may offer some practical advantages, but it also has risks. And so this is what we have to realize. This mentality we have that everything is conspiracy and everything. No, there are, in strategy is a game of mixed skill and chance. Actually, intrigues within strategies, most intrigues fail. The fact that they occasionally work is the only reason anyone would engage in them. Because once you engage in deceptive behavior, like Dr. Chinea says, there are risks, serious ones, when you fail. And she further writes, one day nationalists may realize that the Russians are also backing the separatists. Conservatives may wake up and see that the Russians are also supporting LGBT rights groups. Greeks may see that the Russians are helping the Turks. Anti-immigration movements may finally understand that Russia is behind the immigration crisis in Europe. This should make things easier for us. We don't have to use equally gigantic resources to counteract the Russian plans. It's enough to expose them. They will get compromised, at least to a significant extent. And it's only a matter of time. And this is what we're seeing across the map with the many plans of Russia and China falling apart. It's not to say their final plan is that button, that very destructive use of nuclear weapons. Let us pray they don't go there, because I don't think that will deliver victory to them either. It'll only cause widespread destruction and death. But I think this is the deeper reality here. And the reason to warn, I was never one that was warning about the communist conspiracy as much as about the nuclear weapons, because the conspiracy itself, the closer it gets to success, the closer it gets to being exposed.
Yeah.
So when whether you're using the Nazis or MAGA or the alt-right, you've got the Duginists, whether you're trying to infiltrate and use the Catholic Church, whether you're trying to use certain sects or Protestant denominations, whatever kind of active measure you're using, it has a shelf life. And then you have to change everything. And that's when the stumbles happen. That's when your big losses take place. Did your lies gain you anything, really? Sometimes they get gained. Sometimes they can get control of new countries. But a lot of times they'll lose whole parts of their empire, or they'll fall back. Look at the war in Ukraine. It's a classic example.
Now here's a thing that's fairly recent. Speaking at a NATO press conference in The Hague on June 25th, U.S. President Donald Trump said it was possible Russia could target other countries beside Ukraine. When asked whether Russian President Putin has territorial ambitions beyond Ukraine, Trump replied, "It's possible. I know one thing. Putin, would like to settle the war. He'd like to get out of this thing. It's a mess for him." While Trump appeared to downplay concerns about Putin's threat, he later said that the Russian leader really has to end that war against Ukraine. Trump also referred to Russia's all-out war as a crisis. I consider Putin a person I think is misguided. Then the U.S. leader said his June 25th meeting with Zelensky, which preceded the briefing, couldn't have been nicer. I think it's a great time to end the war. I'm going to speak to Vladimir Putin, see if we can get it ended. Zelensky, is fighting a brave battle. It's a tough battle. Separately, Trump acknowledged that Ukraine wants to receive Patriot missiles, saying that the U.S. is going to see if we can make some available. And so when this kind of stuff is being said, and when all this stuff is happening right now, stuff that the Russians don't like, stuff that the Chinese don't like, clamping down on Harvard and all the foreign Chinese spies and just all kinds of stuff going on. Of course, there's people that are going to be highly frustrated. I mean, there's people that became allies with Russia, people that got their hands dirty, people that can't really go back, or people that don't really want to go back from the path that they've been on. So some people, when things get more serious, some people, they will kind of see, okay, it was a mistake believing the Russians. It was a mistake believing all this stuff on the internet. But some people are going to double down. Some people will actually go all the way and say, well, Trump deceived us maybe. They will say that Trump was a plant. This was just a charade. Trump lied to us the whole time. And so now a number of MAGAs, a number of conspiracy buffs, they're really, really mad about this Palantir thing. It was a New York Times story. Trump taps Palantir, the company, to compile data on Americans. So this is
and you
when,
can tell us about this company, this Palantir company.
Yeah,
you could explain what it does.
Well, this whole company, this whole menu of software that they offer is, it's being used around the world. There was a version for the military. Then there was a software for the police, even German police. German police is using a version of Palantir, or a software product from them. It's about algorithms and predictive algorithms telling you essentially how to use your resources in the best way possible, because everybody has limited resources. Every police unit, every military, Department of Homeland Security, FBI, everybody has limited resources, and you can get a bunch of data, but how to find the needle in the haystack, and this is where the software comes in, because a computer, if it's programmed right, if a software is programmed right, it can see patterns faster than other people can see. We've seen the first iterations of this. I think this was in the 80s when some communist spies were exposed, and also some Islamic spies in conjunction with the Soviet Union were exposed because of their travel patterns. Because this is when computers were used more and more for these things. And they figured out that, this guy, he traveled in Europe, and he was traveling to specific cities on specific days. And this is also when some other highly suspect people, some diplomats or whatever, when they were there. And then the computer could say, this is not a coincidence. There's a pattern here. It's almost impossible for it to be a coincidence. And this is how you can find your suspects quicker and surveil them, and then you can find the real evidence. But now everybody puts in his data in the internet. Everything you watch, everything you say, everything you do on the web, your opinions, everything you do leaves a data trail. And software can better and better predict if you are a threat, or you could become a threat under specific circumstances. Now, so none of this is new. There were programs in the Cold War compiling data, figuring out foreign populations. This was even done in Iran, by the way, a long time ago, figuring out different population groups and how they tick, and what they are susceptible, what ways they are susceptible. And the American government, they used software like this in places like Chile, countries like Chile, where they would ask around, different groups in the population, what would a leader look like and sound like that you would love to follow? So they compiled all this to be prepared for when the communists were trying to do something. So it's just, a modern tool set, because there's so much data, right? In the old days, right, in the Cold War, you could figure stuff out. You could figure out who was a subscriber to an underground magazine. You can get a subscriber list, or you can surveil physical meeting places, or you can tap phone lines, and listen to people. But now there's so much data. Everybody can join a group any day of the week, any hour of the day. You can join some cause. You can become involved in something and consume something. And so the tools have matched the current level of communication. And now, of course, you can tell who's getting nervous about this. Some of the MAGAs, and we got Ron Paul is getting nervous about this. There's a story here. Ron Paul, President Trump is unleashing a great big ugly surveillance state. This was published like 10 days ago. It says here, and then this is written by Ron Paul or one of his people and with their strange connections. It says, on March 20, President Trump signed an executive order named Eliminating Information Silos. The order directed heads of federal agencies to make sure officials designated by the president have full and prompt access to all unclassified agency records, data, software systems, and information technology systems. The executive order did not attract much attention until it was more recently revealed that the administration was working with tech company Palantir to create a database containing all information collected by all federal agencies on all U.S. citizens. So this isn't just about Joe Schmo becoming a radical and the software kind of can guess what direction Joe Schmo is going, direction he's going in. But it's also about the people in government, these potential moles and traitors and, Russia-loving people and China-loving people who have access to classified and unclassified data. Palantir can find strange behavior. You can tell software like Palantir's products to find the oddities, to find the strangeness, to find something that doesn't belong. And I think this is making a lot of people nervous, especially Ron Paul. Now, I don't trust the people behind Palantir, but we talked about them before. But on its at face value, it's just baseline government work, counterintelligence work, security work, and guess who's whining? Blah blah blah. He says here,
the usual suspects. Everyone on the left whines, of course, but now people on the right are starting to whine. We're all a bunch of whiners now. Good grief.
Yeah, and the New York Times said this. The New York Times recently wrote this. The Trump administration has expanded Palantir's work across the federal government in recent months. The company has received more than $113 million in federal government spending since Mr. Trump took office, according to public records. And so all the government agencies, they all want to use Palantir, or they're all supposed to use Palantir products in the future. Social Security Administration, Internal Revenue Service. I mean, what is the classic problem? Or what used to be the classic problem when it comes to, let's say, Russian spies or Chinese spies? They try to blend in. And they try to leave little paper trails. They try to, sometimes take on another person's identity, some dead child. Or just they clone somebody's they clone somebody's data and then use that. And so spies that are embedded or recruited, sleeper spies, they need to have lives that seem innocuous, but that kind of has that puts them in contact with Social Security Administration, Internal Revenue Service. And so when you have kind of the same software products being used in all these agencies, I mean, guess what the possibilities could be. Because at some point, the spy will deviate from a normal person, correct? I mean, he has to do something that a normal person wouldn't do.
So, well, they aren't normal people, most spies. There are a number of characteristics that you could spot them. They zigzag. They change their positions back and forth. Moles are like this. They say one thing one moment and another thing the next because they're tactically maneuvering. They have to maneuver within this environment. They have to carry out their assigned assignments from the side they're working for, but at the same time, they have to appear to be good guys to the people they're infiltrating. And there's something that rings hollow with them. Yeah. And they have a hollowness. Narcissism being a major trait of covert or overt narcissists. Overt narcissists are kind of clowns. So but narcissism is indicated. There are abnormal personalities. Their egos are huge. They have grandiosity.
Yeah, and it's
We
like
see that in Edward Snowden, by the way.
yeah,
even
and
though
it's
he
like
seems humble.
when you want to find the needle in the haystack. I mean, if you understand every bit of the haystack, or you observe every flimsy piece of the haystack, you will find the needle. I mean, if we think about the uncovered moles, the big traders that sold intelligence for sometimes decades and got paid
Kim
handsomely.
Philby, Aldrich James, Robert Hansen. These are examples.
What was the stuff that was became very visible later on, that was studied later on, how these spies behaved? I mean, we saw that certain traders, they started to buy the nice cars, and they started to have the better suits than their bosses.
Aldrich James did that, and he claimed that his wife had an inheritance.
Yeah.
I think his wife was from a South American country, but
and they made up some stories. So they got money. His in-laws, they got money, and so he's got money to spend.
Drawing attention, to himself.
But,
and with Robert Hansen, and I would say also with Kim Philby, there's sexual compulsions there. When you study
but how can you keep anything like that secret nowadays when you have all this data and we have all these tools to sift through the data? Because I mean, eventually, if a real trader, I mean, we know what they got paid in the past. I mean, we know they got paid, like, I don't know, was it $50,000 extra bonus money?
It's a pittance when you think about what they're doing, what they're stealing.
But it was like $50,000 extra back in the day, which was a lot more money for delivering, some Russian guy, some high up Russian guy, betraying that guy who was trying to help Western intelligence, and so that guy got killed over there and tortured, and the trader gets $50,000 extra, but they have to spend the money, or they wanted to spend the money, or they had to stash the money, because what are you going to do? I mean, you take on that risk, you have all the stress of getting caught one day, and you want to feel, as you mentioned, the narcissism of the trader, you want to feel superior to these other people. So suddenly the traders have better suits than their bosses. They're superiors. They have better cars, or they have another property, and they buy a boat.
There's a way they have a need to feel superior to the people around them. That's part of the narcissist. It's at the expense of other people. They elevate themselves. There's a envy. There's a recent study in Italy that suggests that sadism is a big part of narcissism, especially covert narcissism, and that they get pleasure from hurting other people. Now, this brings you to psychopathy too, but this is what you find in these people, and so and there's this relationship to the father. The fatherland is your home country. And it was pointed out, this is a condition, if you study the famous American trader, was Benedict Arnold. And a retired psychologist told me, I wrote an article on Benedict Arnold for WorldNet Daily, quarter of a century ago. And she wrote to me very kindly and said, that Benedict Arnold was sort of the model for when people started talking about narcissistic personality disorder. He was kind of a case study, and of course his relationship with his wife and his wife to be, the way he was recruited through his vanity. He felt like he was a victim or he was persecuted. Yeah. He had paranoid ideation. And all these different things.
Yeah, and that's kind of what technology can now use to predict things or assign probabilities. Because when these traders got caught, the famous ones, there was a whole post-mortem investigation. How did we get to this place? How did this happen? And there was so many warning signs. There were so many red flags. And there's other cases, even from Germany, when some of the big traders, they had the biggest marital trouble, or there was suddenly the wife was dead, and alcoholism and gambling, and then the warning signs, and they had internal problems at the agencies that they worked for. And colleagues would have negative things to say about them, and I mean, you can assemble so many different profiles of known traders. And you can train a software. You can train a piece of software to learn how to spot the signs and at least narrow down the field. Because it's one thing if you suspect a mole and you have hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of potential suspects. But so you have to narrow it down. You actually have to narrow it down. And I think that there's also
the problem that Angleton had looking for moles in the CIA. He developed what he called a barium test, where he fed information to see if the KGB would use it. Yeah. And then he would look at the number of people exposed to that information, and he'd put them on a list. Then he'd take a slice of that group, expose them to other information, and see. But whenever it got to the point where he could identify someone, the Russians didn't take the bait. The Russians wouldn't use the information. So the Russians were mathematically charting this on their side, so they never exposed their agent, where you could absolutely have proof from the barium test of who was actually leaking the information to the enemy. It's fascinating. This is the war of the moles. You get a mole inside the other camp. The problem with the CIA and with most Western agencies is that all of their agents ultimately either are enemy double agents, doubled back on them, or executed. This was true in the case of East Germany. None of the American agents recruited in East Germany were actually working for us. They were all doubled back on us. Same thing with Cuba, and I would guess Russia's the same. We've had some successes in Russia here and there, but usually it's only when we get the person out as a defector. If they stay in place for even a short time, they're usually compromised and double back. I think Top Hat is a good example. Fedora, they were doubled back. I think the arguments are pretty clear.
And also,
we never did have these moles. Yeah.
Yeah, and also what became very noticeable with these exposed traitors, the big cases in the Cold War, especially also in place like Germany, you saw kind of a specific performance of these people, and they had trouble selling their services, or they had trouble joining a government agency, or they were just not that good, and they were struggling under stress. They had problems with alcohol, and the performance reviews were mixed and all that. But at some point, and of course they were whining. They were whining about the money. They were whining and complaining about not making enough, or they have a wife that was too expensive for them, or a divorce or whatever. But when they turned traitor, sometimes then the successes would happen. Suddenly they would be more focused. They would be more dedicated towards their career. They would whine less and complain less, and the successes would come. Sometimes even bigger successes, which makes them rise up the ranks and get them more access to information. But nowadays you can scan somebody's entire history. All the data, all the stuff that you put on the internet, all the stuff that you said, all the emotions you expressed. And this is kind of an interesting angle to all of this when we talk about these products. Palantir was founded in 2003 by Alex Karp and Mr. Thiel. Went public in 2020, specializes in finding patterns in data and presenting the information in ways that are easy to process and navigate, such as charts and maps. Its main products include Foundry, data analytics platform, and Gotham, which helps organize and draw conclusions from data and is tailored for security and defense purposes. I mean, of course, nothing really is going to beat a real spy. Nothing's got who's catching the traitors, or human intelligence in general. The people that are suited for counterintelligence, people who are interacting with humans and figuring out what they're all about. And I think this is gonna stay with us forever, despite all the technology, despite all the tools and all the stuff. There's still that spy mindset, or that counterintelligence mindset that's going to make all the difference here. Yeah, I mean, technology. I mean, it's so much as about technology. There's a story here from the inside of, it says, frozen accounts, fake parts, failed deliveries. Russian courts reveal the impact sanctions are having on the Kremlin's defense industry. So everybody's now suing everybody in Russia, apparently, because the deliveries don't come in time, or the parts are not correct, or the quality is not right. And there's people losing money, and people are not meeting those deadlines. And so they are, the Russians are more and more in trouble. And it's everything from these field programmable microchips, and there's all these different examples are being described here. Here, a case of the unfinished ships and sonar station. Like, technology now is everything, or almost everything. The Amur shipbuilding plant, which once built nuclear submarines and now produces surface warships, filed a lawsuit against the Tangarog-based Priboi plant. Priboi had been contracted to supply the Zarya 2 unit made up of an antenna module and control equipment, valued at over 670 million rubles, about $8.5 million. But the delivery fell through. The missing Zarya components were intended for the construction of the corvette Grozny and Bravi, effectively stalling the ship's production. Priboi openly blamed sanctions for the disruption. Its suppliers cited the unavailability of foreign-made components due to the EU's sanctions regulations imposed on February 25th, 2022, right after the invasion of Ukraine. As Priboi explained, import substitution efforts fell flat. The plant tried to source allegedly domestic electronic parts from the Voronezh Semiconductor Device Assembly Plant, JSC, and Milanda Design Center, JSC, but those manufacturers were unable to produce them, and it turned out the supposedly domestic components actually included foreign-made microchips whose import had been restricted by the European Council sanctions. So, as a result, the antenna design documentation had to be modified. So they have to change things around on their weapon system, and that changes how they actually conduct battle, how they can function in a battle context. So, it's like technology is now king in this day and age. And I mean, we saw that now with the strikes against Iran. I mean, what is going to be the next step? I mean, you had the Israelis with some other missions smuggling drones into Iran, and then launching those drones, as you said, and flying them into people's homes. I mean, at what do you think that the American administration is still hoping to turn certain Russians and to get something going? You think that fantasy is still alive, that they can turn people?
Well, the fantasy is alive because what you have is people who are working, they're effectively working for the Russians in many respects. And so they're pushing for this, or they believe in this Russian thing. I mean, Michael Anton is still the head of policy planning for the State Department. You have other advisors around Trump that want to see this happen, whether they've been, corrupted by Russian or Chinese money, or whether they really sincerely believe it. They're pushing this, and but Trump is like I liken him to Mr. Magoo. He's blind, but he's got a stick, but that stick sticks out, and he somehow is intuitively maneuvering. I mean, his maneuver, the bombing of Iran, was really a very deft maneuver because he destroyed the Iranian nuclear program, and then he immediately prevented the Strait of Hormuz from being blocked by immediately declaring peace and pulling back on the leash of the Israeli attack dog. And the Iranians were so afraid, the Iranian government was so afraid of collapsing. They were like, oh, thank goodness, Trump just saved us. Of course, there's people in Israel that are very afraid, very angry that he saved Iran, but he also saved the world from that closing of the Strait of Hormuz, which would have strangled Japan and Europe, because it might might be in reality, anywhere from 1 to 6 months of that 20% of the world's oil supply being cut off could have been economically catastrophic and would have helped the Russians a great deal. And yet Trump gets away with this whole thing, and there's no economic consequence for Trump or his allies, which is very, very surprising. And then to go victorious to that NATO meeting and to be daddy.
Yeah.
Putin's got to be upset. The Chinese have got to be upset. What do they do with this guy? If they've ever had any hold on him, and there's many people that make good arguments that they have, how do you keep hold of someone like that? It's like you can make someone your agent. You can bribe somebody. You can help them, but they can take the money and run and say, well, I did things for you. You did things for me. Let's call it even. Now I'm going to do what I want to do. How can you prevent that? You're going to expose him? Then you expose yourself. If the Russians actually ever had a relationship with Trump, if they expose it, they're exposing that they have these kind of relationships with heads of state.
Yeah,
that would expose all these German politicians.
That would launch a big search for more.
Huge investigations. McCarthyism would be like McCarthy was right, and then they'd be screwed. All of their influence and all these governments, and this goes back to my quote of Dr. Anka Maria Chernea saying that if you live by this method, you die by this method. If you're going to use intrigue and spies and bribery, you can have people that take the money, do a little bit for you, and say, I've done enough. How do you discipline them? You can kill certain people. You're going to kill the president of the United States. He's got a button too, right? And this is one of the reasons why, Colonel Stanislav Lunev told me years ago, no, when you have an agent and he reaches a certain rank, he's not your agent anymore. And that's very realistic from the Russian side. The Russian KGB generals don't want to fool themselves about the reality of, imagine a person with a narcissistic personality gets to be that powerful. You think you're going to control them?
Yeah.
They're going to turn it right around on you. So like John McCain, having been a prisoner in North Vietnam and picking Sarah Palin as his running mate. So are you going to do something to me? John McCain is saying to the Russians and the Vietnamese, you're going to reveal me? You're going to get this woman. She's your worst nightmare if she becomes president because you've gotten me. I think that's why he picked Sarah Palin. He didn't like her, but I think that's why he picked her.
Yeah, and also it became such a problem, I think, for the Russians to reward and protect the people that work for them, right? Because there's like this used to be like a big theater, when let's say some big trader here in Germany in the Cold War, a huge trader, he trusted his handlers, his Russian handlers, and he was told that when things become too dangerous, we'll warn you in advance, and we'll get you out, and we'll just evacuate you, and you'll come, you'll be back in the public, sphere in the Eastern Bloc, and you just can brag on, and we're gonna give you the red carpet treatment. But it didn't go that way. He was caught and was in prison for years, and then he was swapped. And then after the prisoner swap or the spy swap, the Russians or the East Germans, they had to give him the red carpet treatment, but it was like this very secluded deal that they had for this guy. They gave him like a prestigious fake job, which he didn't really like. Nobody really liked him. They all had to pretend to like him. He couldn't really travel, especially not to the West, because everybody was afraid he was gonna return back home and say it was all a big mistake, or I see it more, from a distance now. I see it differently now. And it's like in recent years, they broke so many rules, and they've cannibalized each other. When another guy falls out of a window in Russia, and another guy falls out of a window, and another guy has a heart attack, another guy has a heart attack. I mean, who wants to work with these people? Who wants to work with the Russians? Honestly, I mean, there's this thing right here. which I've mentioned before. About just breaking all the rules. This investigative program by the Insider, Der Spiegel, and 60 Minutes about the Havana Syndrome just won an Emmy Award, like the highest television award that there is. Now, this was a joint investigation, received an Emmy Award for outstanding investigative news coverage. The investigation explored a series of unexplained incidents that have affected U.S. diplomats, intelligence officers, and other government officials around the world for more than a decade. Victims have described what feels like a paralyzing blow from an invisible force, often resulting in lifelong disabilities. Symptoms include extreme migraines, loss of balance, and difficulty concentrating. Until recently, U.S. intelligence agencies maintained they had no evidence linking foreign actors to the syndrome. However, the joint reporting by the Insider, Der Spiegel, and 60 Minutes revealed that the timing and locations of several attacks coincided with the movements of operatives from Russia's GRU military intelligence agency. And so they've done like this whole elaborate this whole elaborate report, and essentially it's, it is breaking the rules. I mean, if you have people with diplomatic cover, diplomatic protection, I mean, there are rules to the game. I mean, once the Russians do something like this, they have new fancy sound weapons or electromagnetic weapons, and they're really sneaky about it, and they cause this physical, long-lasting damage to American officials and intelligence officers in different countries, not necessarily on Russian soil. It's like somewhere else around the world. And when you break rules like this, I mean, what's the US side going to do? I mean, how is the American side going to react? And how is, the average person who is flirting with the Russians or has done some things with the Russians, I mean, what is this person going to think if they see something like this? I mean, is it really worth it working with the Russians when they play games like this? When you become a liability, when you just when they don't need you anymore, they zap you, and then you retire, and then you can drink their vodka, or you can just, I don't know, sit on your porch and stare into the distance for the rest of your life.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting way to put it. I would say that that what we've got now is a situation in which the Russians and the Chinese have to decide whether their economies will carry them through full mobilization for China and Russian victory in Ukraine, or whether they need to go to nukes, and it goes to or whether they're crazy enough to go to nukes, and or just because I don't know where these regimes go. What is their future? They live in a kind of delusion. Putin has got a delusion that he can win. How does he do this? NATO is going to get stronger from here on out. Now that this commitment, this meeting in NATO has happened, from now until 10 years from now, there's going to be a strengthening of NATO. Now maybe relatively, because Russia's fully mobilized, Russia will be stronger in a year or in 2 years. But they've got this window to do something. And you don't know whether Russia has the morale, the people, the ingenuity, the situation, what's going to go, what are they going to trip over next? And can they create, they've been trying to create civil unrest in the United States they're trying to use the left, and they're trying to create a civil war here. They really haven't succeeded in doing that so far. And I wonder if the far right and the far left, the crazy MAGAs and the crazy lefties, I wonder if the rest of the country is just going to look at them and say, yuck, we don't want to have this kind of agitation, go away. Yeah. And I don't know what the mood is in Germany now. Maybe you could tell us, but Germany seems under Merz. Merz seems good, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's what we expected him to be. I mean, this is like the kind of people that were pushed aside during that crucial era, starting in 1991, supposed end of the USSR, and then the whole Angela Merkel era. We've had nothing but weird chancellors in that time slot. From the end of Helmut Kohl to now Friedrich Merz.
So he's the not weird chancellor. Is that what you're saying, Merz?
Yeah, he's like the guy you expect. He's exactly what you expected him to be. He's like all the things you just took for granted in the past. But in between, Helmut Kohl and this guy, we've had all these weirdos. We've had these crazy weirdos, people who grew up in Soviet East Germany and rose through the system. And we've had chancellors like Gerhard Schröder, who's very close to Putin and worked for some of these Eastern companies, and who's always been anti NATO his entire life and had these connections back in the old days. And there's still a debate how early German Chancellor Schröder, how early he met some of these people that are very close to Putin and these gas companies. I mean, there were some lawsuits about that. The timeline. When did you first meet Putin? How long? Because Putin used to be Putin was stationed in Dresden for the KGB. And so, and the Russians, they had all these networks here, and people that became influential later on with all these energy deals. And so, when did you meet? Oh, well, it was like, I don't remember, and it was like they give different statements sometimes, so they dispute other people's statements. And so we have nothing but these weirdo chancellors. Now it's like back to normal, back to what we're used to. And it's like the West at its current state, as much as all the problems that we have, all of the financial, economical problems that we have, especially with the climate scare and how we all had to change our industries. I mean, look at the other side right now. Look at how far the other side is willing to go. Here's the story here from a week ago.
The other side meaning
the Eastern countries, the
Russians,
the Chinese, and North Koreans.
And there's the worry is that they've got these nukes and they look like they're building up for a nuclear assault on Europe.
Yeah, and also to supply all the to have the workforce and to feed the soldiers, to have the delivery systems, to have the infrastructure for a nuclear war, a protective war. They're now going back to basically slave labor. This is a story from a week ago. Modern day slave labor is being imported from North Korea into Russia despite a UN ban. So they're scaling this up. So constantly, thousands of North Koreans are entering Russia, posing as students on practical training, but instead coming to labor under slave-like conditions. This practice directly violates UN sanctions that Russia itself has agreed to. The workers toil 6 days a week, sometimes for up to 20 hours a day, while their wages are divided between the North Korean regime and Russian companies. And oh, by the way, are people aware that people in North Korea, they actually do meth a lot? Methamphetamines. In
North Korea, I hadn't read that.
Yeah,
really,
it's a thing. Yeah, it's really a thing because they have to work so much and there's so little food, and they use smaller doses. They kind of microdose amphetamines to work double shifts, or just to not be hungry and just to go on about their lives and working 2-3 jobs. And I mean,
have you heard that they are giving this to the soldiers on the front, the eastern countries?
Yeah, I mean, it's like
in
this. They have like different systems where they.
I mean, Germany did it for its troops in World War II. They gave them.
Yeah. The Muslims do it a lot. Muslim armies are doing this a lot. They're making these kind of everywhere. They have like these what they call the new ones, Captagon pills, and they're shipping them everywhere.
Stay awake for 72 hours and fight a battle.
Yeah, it's not just about being awake for so long. It's also about the feeling of euphoria while you're in battle. You know, it's like you're excited, you feel invincible, and you want to do things, and it's like this feeling that a human normally can never have, that euphoria and that energy. But it's like when you talk about soldiers and the labor force, I mean, they can supply these people with specific dosages of amphetamines. They can monitor these people. I mean, that's been in talks with militaries. I think the Chinese have experimented with this because, I mean, people nowadays they like to have their smart watches, right? These Apple watches or Android watches, and they can monitor your biological system and record it. And so the idea now is in various militaries, you give amphetamines to soldiers, but you monitor the soldiers so they don't burn out too quickly. And this is now apparently the future. This is how the Eastern countries are playing this. They're going to have slaves. They put them on amphetamines and make them work and make them burn out. And when they're no longer of any use, they can die. They're no longer necessary. You know, they will just disappear. I mean, there's now a high demand for these North Korean slaves. Once in Russia, such students are put to work under the guise of study training. A 2020 reform in Russian migration law further widened this loophole by allowing foreign students to work without any limitations to their hours spent on the job. So this is how they play it now. And they will do this to Koreans, they will do this to other people. And this is just the beginning. I mean, imagine what a war economy or a war mobilization is going to look like on amphetamines, because not only do these Eastern countries have more men to spare, you know, more young men as workers and soldiers, but they can waste them. You know, they can put them on amphetamines for a couple of years, just like the Nazis did, even though they figured out fairly quickly. You can only do this for a couple of years, and then you have these burnt out people.
Well, with the German use, I've read about it, but they would only do it when they were in a military operation. They didn't continually have them on them. But I imagine it created dependency among some of the soldiers, and it would have had effects, like you say, burn them out, make them so that they were less able later on. Is that right?
Well, there's a...
What was the history there?
Well, I did I'm trying to find this real quick here. I did something on this topic a while ago. And so there's different ways to play this. I mean, sometimes you can restrict the use of amphetamines to emergencies. Like, for example, your pilot gets shot down, your pilot parachutes out, or somebody, or a special forces team who is deep behind enemy lines doing something really, really special that other soldiers couldn't do. So very, very valuable troops and soldiers and pilots. So they are in an emergency situation. They cannot afford to fall asleep. They have to go through with this operation, get to the extraction point, whatever it takes to save themselves or to finish the operation. And so you can restrict the use of amphetamines to operations like this, or a specific Air Force operations when you say the pilot has to be alert for 12 hours or 24 hours or something like that. And you can train people even with the use of amphetamines so they can kind of understand the limitations of it, or especially when it comes to pilots, not overestimate what you and your airplane can do. Because that's kind of the big problem with amphetamines. They make you believe you can do things that you cannot do. I mean, there's hordes of university students that have tried to, dabbled with amphetamines to study more, study longer, and be better in the test or write the perfect paper. But then they realize once they're off the drug and they read their own material, it's not great. They thought it was great when they wrote it, just like some pilots thought they were flying great, even though they weren't flying great. So you can train people on these things. But, what's an emergency tool? As it oftentimes happened, an exception sometimes becomes the rule when they say, we're having not enough men, or we have to, expedite the timeline for the operation, so we'll just give out more of these amphetamines, or we just use these soldiers for another day straight, or maybe one more day straight. I mean, the Germans went crazy with this, when they tried to overrun France, overrun their enemies, but sometimes this would cause problems, when Rommel, for example, when he would push forward too fast and he would take on enemy fire, and there was almost nobody to support him in the back because he was just going and going and going and going. So here I found this now. So this is when this became a topic in mainstream media a few years ago in the Ukraine war. The Ukrainians were telling stories how the Russian soldiers, and sometimes these North Koreans, they're mixed in there, how these Russians and how these North Koreans, they were almost like zombies. It was almost like the movie World War Z when the zombies attack in these human waves. Machine gunners would gun them down, but they were still coming and coming and coming and coming. Sometimes even people that got shot would still move forward. And there was a report on this from the think tank, the RUSI. I think this is a British, very established British think tank. The title was "Meat Grinder: Russian Tactics in the Second Year of Its Invasion of Ukraine." And so the Ukrainians, they started to find these containers, empty containers that the Russians would use, containing some sort of liquid amphetamine. So this is what the Russians would leave behind, and so there's all kinds of stuff that are being used. They're usually all cocktails are being used, opioids, ephedrine, ephedrine, trifedrine, methadone, codepsin, codaterp, all kinds of stuff that these soldiers are using. And even the American military at some point experimented with this. This was in, I think, in Vietnam. It was also meant for emergencies or battles that get drawn out, just for emergencies, but then people use it more often. And the standard dosage for the Americans, the standard dosage was meant to be 20 milligrams of dextroamphetamine to be able to fight for 48 hours. So this was kind of like a careful consideration, but the soldiers in the field, they didn't necessarily follow those guidelines. They would sometimes do a lot more. So a lot of dextroamphetamine is stronger than the benzodrine that was used in World War II. So then the British Army, the British forces, they developed a drug cocktail which is called Forced March. So this is a long time ago, and so this was kind of this contained traces of cocaine, the Germans, they made chewing gum with cocaine for the for pilots and people on submarines. So there you go. Cocaine chewing gum that was also used in the past. Yeah. And now you got these North Koreans. You got North Korean workers, you got North Korean soldiers, and they work for 20 hours a day. And they have no chance of escaping. And this is what we're up against.
Well, that's interesting. I found an interesting thing. One of the problems with modern age is the way everything is involved in masses, and it's there's this thing with Trump and the way people admire him. People want a leader, and I've made the argument. I'm critical of Trump, and I preface that by saying that I prefer Trump to the Democrat. I'm not a leftist. I couldn't stand Kamala Harris. But it's interesting what Kierkegaard writes, Kierkegaard wrote this almost 200 years ago, The Present Age, this essay, and he said, instead of being strengthened in their discernment and encouragement to do good, today's people go home with even stronger predisposition to do the most dangerous, if only the most respectable of all diseases, to admire in public what is considered unimportant in private life, since everything is made into a joke. And so, stimulated by a gush of admiration, they're all comfortably agreed that they might just as well admire themselves. And he said, formerly it was agreed that man stood or fell by his actions. Nowadays, on the contrary, everyone idles about and comes off brilliantly with the help of a little reflection, knowing perfectly well what ought to be done. But what two people talking together or the speakers at a meeting understand perfectly presented to them as a thought or an observation, they cannot understand it all in the form of action. And I suppose that might be what makes Trump unique, in that Trump, unlike a lot of our politicians and presidents, is able to act in a very curious way. I am astonished by his the adept nature of his gaming the situation in the Middle East and the knocking out. Here we sit a week later and Iran's nuclear program is dust, and really that pawn. Now it doesn't mean that Iran doesn't have some nuclear weapons, but it's not going to have thousands of missiles and thousands of warheads. This ambition is not going to be realized. And Israel, because of the size of its nuclear arsenal, Iran is not going to dare mess with Israel. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Trump is not. I mean, Trump is so old that he's not looking at, he's not looking at 20 more years in politics. He's not looking at.
That's a good point. Yeah,
and he doesn't depend on politics either. But
he is looking for some kind of legacy. He wants to be this peacemaker.
Yeah. But he's somebody who can be bold now. He doesn't have to be like. He doesn't have to be like a Kamala Harris, because we all expected Kamala Harris to be more of the same, just idling around, just tightening more controls over business and just suffocating everything more slowly and not daring to do anything special, and just idling and idling and idling, constantly worrying about the opinions and the polls and whatnot. And but Trump is somebody who can use these people in government, or who can follow along somebody's plan and have a menu presented to him of options. Now, for example, there's this General Kane. It's now become very important. General Dan Kane, they also call him Raisin Kane, newly confirmed chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And Trump was very happy with him. I mean, obviously, if the operation had not worked so well, Trump would have not been so happy about him, I guess. Quote, I have to say, General Raising Kane was incredible, Trump told reporters on Wednesday, using Kane's Air Force nickname in describing his role in the Iran operation. Instead of calling Kane General or Dan, Trump sometimes calls him Raisin. Kane had spent much of his military career as an F-16 fighter pilot in the Air National Guard. Deploying several times to the Middle East, he was assigned to Andrews Air Force Base on September 11th, 2001, when his unit was scrambled to protect the skies over Washington. Later, he worked on special operations tactics for stealth aircraft, as well as on highly classified programs at the Pentagon, Joint Special Operations Command, and the Central Intelligence Agency. Now, Trump has these people at his disposal, and at the same time, Trump can easily dismiss other people and cut their role or just fire them. I mean, we've seen that with Bannon. I mean, what is going on with Steve Bannon? I mean, he's just like sitting in his podcasting studio, acting like he can run the world and he knows better than everybody, and he knows about what we should be doing with Israel and Iran and with the Russians and stuff. I mean, Steve Bannon was used for a while and then dismissed. And now we see the star falling of Tulsi Gabbard, apparently.
Well, these interesting. These are the pro-Russian people, Bannon and Gabbard.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And
Trump is maneuvered, has zigged and zagged his way outside their scope of their propaganda, and they no longer seem to have a place.
Yeah, it says here.
Now that could change. He could zig back, and they could be still in the light then. But it's very curious to see them in there. I mean, have you watched some of Steve Bannon's more recent stuff? I mean, what is Bannon saying about Trump and the bombing of Iran?
I mean, it seems like Bannon, who was briefly a part of the administration, and I've never seen anything unique from Bannon. I mean, he's never actually had a special solution idea for anything. He's never really been in something. He's never really had to have the initiative and solve something. And now he's like doing this commentary podcaster thing, and he seems so sure of himself, and he seems so incredibly sure of himself. He's talking about the recent strikes, and he talks about Israel, and he seems like he's still playing the same crowd. The crowd like in 2016 that was ecstatic when Trump got elected, and characters like Bannon created this impression. We made this possible. It's gonna be a specific way. Your dreams are going to be fulfilled, and we're gonna make this happen. And very quickly, Bannon was out. So here it is. This is on Twitter recently, or X now. Here, quote, Bannon: "The regime change we should be looking for is in Jerusalem." Host of Bannon's War Room, Steve Bannon tells Matt Gaetz he believes that the regime change we should be looking for is in Jerusalem. While discussing the Israel-Iran conflict and the actions taken by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe we can get some audio so people can hear this this soundbite. Now, obviously, he's talking a lot, and this is just a little soundbite. But here we go. Play this.
The hardest job in the world for the last 48 hours has clearly been Mark Levin's cardiologist. And I'm just wondering, after he's lost his cool with you and with me, because we make television programs for smart people, if you think Mark Levin would go to jail to protect President Trump.
Oh, I don't. It's not even on the question. He's been very self-serving, super never Trump. But the big issue, the reason he's losing it, he doesn't have any arguments. I mean, his arguments of Israel first and putting Israel ahead of the national security concerns of the American people in the United States is quite frankly unacceptable. That's why I've always called for a foreign agent investigation of him. But the biggest thing you saw today was Pete Hegseth, Matt, as you saw the Secretary of Defense Hegseth call out Fox News and said right there, they're the worst at trying to always promote the forever wars. Now they're making up all this stuff. You got to go on a massive manhunt for yellow cake. Oh, excuse me. I mean, other nuclear material. President Trump did a total annihilation, a total obliteration. The 12-day war is over. President Trump is pivoting back to other issues he's got, and this thing is done. And that's why they're losing their mind, because they had to have not just a forever war, but they had to have regime change to be able to justify the Netanyahu regime. We should have regime change. I've argued this. We should have a regime change. I think the regime change we should be looking for is in Jerusalem.
So yeah, this is kind of what's going on right now. So he's still trying to. He still wants the pro-Trump people to like him. They're supposed to give him money, and he still wants to get back into, I don't know, the limelight. And I think you're still on mute.
Oh, I was ready to say something. Yeah, the idea of regime change in Jerusalem. What does he mean? What does that mean?
Yeah,
I don't.
Is he suggesting that Israel was the cause of these so-called forever wars? With the weapons of mass destruction, Iraq, Afghanistan, and like the Jews caused these Bush era wars. Is that what he's suggesting, or am I reading into this?
Have you ever thought that Bannon was anti-Semitic?
He can say things to get attention and to get people to like him, but there's always plausible deniability. There's always plausible deniability. He doesn't have to be too explicit. It's crowd pleasing. He wants to please. He wants to please the audience and say, well, he
is basically part of this dark enlightenment, really, isn't he? With Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin, and he's plugged into some of the same dark forces. I mean, look, Steve Bannon has been accused of anti-Semitism by various groups and individuals. Now, how do we evaluate it? Here's some of the incidents. His ex-wife in 2007, there was a court filing during the divorce, and her name is, I think it's Mary Louise Picard. Not to be associated with the Starship Commander from Star Trek Generations, different Picard, alleged that he made anti-Semitic remarks, stating that, quote, didn't want the girls going to school with Jews, unquote, and that he said he, quote, doesn't like Jews and that he doesn't like the way they raise their kids to be whiny brats, unquote. Now, Bannon has denied this allegation by his ex-wife. And then there's the Breitbart News and its relationship with the alt-right. And of course, you in Europe, you know this alt-right better than a lot of Americans understand how it works in Europe. But as executive chairman of Breitbart News, Bannon described the site as, quote, the platform of the alt-right. Now, you know why that's problematic. The Southern Poverty Law Center, not that I agree with them on everything, on many things, and others have documented how Breitbart's comments section under Bannon's leadership increasingly reflected anti-Semitic and alt-right language. Now, Bannon has claimed zero tolerance for anti-Semitic views, but critics have argued that the site's emphasis against globalist elites, that's a code word for banksters, which is a code word for Jews, Jewish world Masonic conspiracy. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, how do you evaluate this from the point of view of being in Germany? There is there this taint on Bannon?
Well, they kind of made it. I mean, the alt-right, and there's different strains to it, obviously, but they tried to make it cool again. They try to some influencers out there and all the people that are not that famous, but they have followers on the web and the different, Telegram channels and this, that, and the other place. A lot of these alt-right people, they try to make, the Nazi era anti-Semitism, try to make it cool again. And create a trend. You know, if you're in on it and you joke around with it and you post these anti-Semitic caricatures, you know, these crazed looking, not even human looking creatures, you know, like comic book exaggerations of Jews, that came back a lot on the internet, and just creating a trend and try to blend it with anything else under the sun. You know, if you're mad about not making much money, if you're mad about that, you know, women are not interested in you, and you're mad about foreign policy, and you're mad about everything, here's your perfect internet cult. And, you know, you can and they created this, or they had this humor, you know, this really dark psychopathic humor, you know, which was kind of typical for the neo-Nazi movement. And we saw that a lot. And people thought it was, I mean, people who got sucked into this, they thought it was really edgy and really funny, because humor is such an important part of the internet. It's hard to explain for people who haven't delved into this a lot, or who haven't seen this over the last 20 years or 25 years, let's say, when the internet really was in the most, was really in that phase when you had content, not just text, but, you know, videos and stuff, and the meme culture. So humor is incredibly important to a lot of people on the internet, because it does get a reaction out of you. It's almost more important than anger, right? Because everybody can get angry at everything. You know, you get somebody cuts you off in traffic, you get angry, or taxes are too high, you buy groceries and it's too expensive, you get angry. But to make people laugh and to have a higher degree of humor, that was so important to this internet culture. And so they try to make it cool, they try to make it funny, and merged it with meme culture, and there's stuff on the web. I mean, when I look at something, and when I look at TikTok, you know, the video app with the short videos, out of nowhere, out of absolutely nowhere, I get these videos recommended to me, which is about making unwearable t-shirts. You know, just making the most outrageous, rage-baiting t-shirts that you could think of. And it's usually something about Jews, right? So they take, let's say, the movie poster for the movie Jaws, you know, with the shark. You see, like, the shark, and then there's on the water surface, there's like somebody swimming, I guess, if I remember correctly. And there's the big title, Jaws. And then they replace the shark with a Jewish nose, and then there's money floating on the water surface. And instead of Jaws, it says Jews. And they make all kinds of jokes like this, you know, Jiu-Jitsu, and just this become internet culture. And it became such an issue, especially around 2015, 2016. It became such an issue that the most committed people on the internet, they started to believe this was some sort of form of magic, chaos magic that they were performing. You know, by influencing people, by making people laugh, by transporting these ideas or making people angry, and having certain memes like Keck or this stupid frog or whatever, they thought they were performing magic. You know, this is something that really caught on, and Bannon. I mean, Bannon made money off of it. I think he was quite popular for a while. And there's so many people like him. I mean, it's not like he's unique, right? It's not like Bannon has ever said something that you can't find anywhere else on the internet 24/7.
Well, Bannon is like many of these people. I mean, Dugin's association with the anti-Semites in Europe, together with Dugin's attacks on anti-Semites. I mean, but it's all very subtle. And in the case of Bannon has professed to be a friend of Israel. Bannon has claimed that the real anti-Semitism is on the left, and that he's a supporter of Israel. So, but it's a very funny thing. I find with Nick Land and this Enlightenment, and Curtis Yarvin is Jewish, but yet there is something there. Bannon is Catholic. I think Posobiec is Catholic. Many of the people look at Candace Owens is Catholic. I think her new husband. Now Candace Owens, I mean, that is really, she's stepped right into Jewish Masonic conspiracy theory, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that your understanding?
All over.
I mean, she's really hardcore. And again, Catholic. Look, I knew when I would meet, this is 30, 40 years ago, Catholic, priests out of Ireland who were steeped in this stuff. The whole conspiracy theory around the Abbe Beruel, this thing that got going into certain people, and of course the popes have long been against anti-Semitism of this kind, but these theories got going in the late 19th century, started to take off till you had the protocols, which came out of the Eastern Orthodox world, was the Okhrana, the Tsar's regime. This whole idea of this Jewish Masonic conspiracy has been an extremely powerful influence on the 20th century, and it's reemerging in the 21st. After we thought that it had been killed dead with the end of the Nazi regime, it's reemerging. Am I just hallucinating, or is this really happening? And people who would even pose as being pro-Israel or whatever seem to be flirting with it, seem to be shifting their ground. Or are they just trying to hold on to part of their audience? I don't understand entirely why this is happening. The Russians, I think, are pushing it from behind the scenes. What is your take?
Well, I think this could have never worked. I mean, anti-Semitism, in the modern era, it would have disappeared. I mean, the old anti-Semitism was so lame. It was so stupid. It was like, it almost like the Grimm's fairy tales. That was the level of the old school anti-Semitism. It was that ridiculous. And but then when the modern anti-Semitism kicked in, and it became so much more viral, I think this could have never happened if it hadn't been for the Anglos, just building up the new banking system and allowing some Jewish people to do roles, to perform tasks in that system. People get confused when they see a bank like Goldman Sachs. I think, Goldman Sachs, when I think, a few generations ago, Goldman was not even such a huge bank. And with Sidney Weinberg.
And the Rothschilds Bank isn't that big of a bank anymore either.
It became a thing. It became a thing because, the necessities of World War II. It required financial institutions who could work with all the industry, these big industrial
you need real sophisticated financing to finance a war.
Because if you want to make all these airplanes, if you want to make the tanks, if you want to make the trucks, if you want to actually fight the Nazis and fight the Japanese and just be ready for that kind of scale.
Somehow it's all a conspiracy just for the Jews to make money. That's how weird this thing gets.
You need to have a stable plan and a stable system to finance all of this, to transfer these corporations from making regular items to making military items, and then transform them back.
Because the corporation people have to be paid in order to work. Yeah. And the raw materials have to be gathered, and so you need this to finance a war effort.
Yeah, and it's like the old Anglo. And it's the old Anglo rules. I mean, people have really no understanding of how these Anglo systems really worked. It's like you can't.
And they really are Anglo, aren't they? They really are.
Well,
they're not Jewish. They're British American.
Yeah, you can't really go against everybody else and expect to, function like you want, like in a big way, so to say. So you can make money, but it comes with being embedded in a larger system. You can make money, but you can't just burn it all. You can't just waste it all. There's certain obligations. There's privileges, and there's demands of you, right? So this is kind of a system, like an old system of Anglo rules. So when the Rothschild Bank was bigger, it was deeply embedded in the British system. And there was Barings, and then there was some other banks, and Lloyd's and Barclays, and it was very, very tightly integrated. And it's like you can't read history like the internet tells you to read history. So everybody was dumb. Nobody knew how to make a bank. Nobody knew how to really amass financial power. Everybody was stupid, but then these few Jewish people, they suddenly outpaced everybody else. It's ridiculous. And without these banks like Rothschild Bank or Goldman and Schiff and some others, I think without these few banks that were embedded in a larger system, right? Because a bank can go broke. If it's not embedded anymore, if it's not really trusted by the government anymore, if it's not trusted by these other Anglos and the corporations, a bank will go disappear and others will buy up the assets. There you go. But just because of a few banks like Rothschild and Goldman, because of that, and of course financing war production with some of these banks, this kind of gave anti-Semitism. This made the success of anti-Semitism, because otherwise nobody would buy it. If there wasn't a big Jewish bank, if there wasn't people that were asked to find money. It's not like a Rothschild could wake up and say, I want these two countries to go to war. I want these two countries to go to war. I'm going to finance them so I make the decision so they go to war.
Yeah,
no.
There is a relationship. We got to remember that all these financial institutions came about in modernity. They're integral to the prosperity, the material prosperity of modernity. It is banking. It is investment banking that has improved the standard of living, because we invest in new tools. We invest in new ideas that make our lives better. This has been the pattern since, before the Industrial Revolution, when people were actually applying science to curing diseases, building new machines, things that would make life, the railroad, the telegraph, the telephone, the airplane, the car. All these things are amazing, and they've come about only because there was money and a system for making the seed corn to invest in the future. And we continually have to invest to keep our standard of living up. So this became very important in a modern economy. Now, those who believe in the traditional life, who would lionize poverty, would lionize simplicity, the traditionalists often saying, look, these people are not pious anymore. They don't believe in God. They're against it. You'll find that traditionalism and anti-Semitism, there is a relationship there. Yeah. There actually is.
And I think the other big thing, the other big thing was of course the communist revolution in Russia. We talked about this before, because if that didn't happen, or it happened differently, I think that anti-Semitism would be different. It would be different today. And you had a lot of people in Russia who joined this revolution, and just look at everybody who joined the Red Army, who got the sales pitch, join this thing, sign the contract, get the training, get a gun, shoot other people to death. Look at these people who shot other people to death. It's all these Russians, they did this to themselves. There was not a Jew sitting behind every Slavic Russian guy to sign the contract with the Red Army and then just torture and kill fellow Russians. These people joined the movement. They did this to themselves for the most part. Obviously, there was foreign interests and foreign entanglements and internal groups, but by and large, Russians decided by themselves to join this thing and commit all this violence. I mean, there was a section of Russians that had some Jewish background, but these were Russians. I mean, you can't. It's not like the eternal Jew. If you had a Jewish grandfather or you had some bit of Jewish upbringing, that makes you the Jew first and foremost. Always, no. These were Russian people, by and large, and they decided to join this movement, and they were just people.
And there is a relationship between this anti-Semitism as well as the far left, and it goes back to Karl Marx's writing on the Jewish question, and of course Karl Marx wrote things that the most rabid Nazi anti-Semite could have copied out word for word. Karl Marx had written early in his writing career, and it's no accident that there's been this relationship between the far left and the far right, and that both they hate the current disposition, they hate modernity in a sense. The revolutionary, the left wants to overthrow it. The reactionary on the far right wants to go back in time to the Middle Ages. And so there's this relationship between the red and the black, the Nazi and the communist. And there's in the book, The Chief Culprit, Who Started World War II, the chief culprit, Stalin's grand design to start World War II. Victor Suvorov writes at the beginning in his introduction, he shows how Hitler and Stalin were so alike. Hitler being the anti-Semite, Stalin being the communist revolutionary. They formed this alliance in August of 1939 that opened the gate to the September 1st, 1939 invasion of Poland, where, of course, the Soviets invaded on the 17th of September, that same nation of Poland. And this is what Suvorov writes. Hitler had a red flag, and Stalin had a red flag. Hitler ruled in the name of the workers' class. His party was called the Workers' Party. Stalin also ruled in the name of the workers' class. His power system officially bore the title of dictatorship of the proletariat. Hitler hated democracy and struggled against it. Stalin hated democracy and struggled against it. Hitler was building socialism, and Stalin was building socialism. Under the title of socialism, Hitler saw a classless society, and Stalin, under the title of socialism, also saw a classless society. In the midst of the classless society built by Hitler, and in that built by Stalin, flourished slavery in the truest sense of the word. Hitler held his road to socialism as the only correct one and viewed all other paths as distortions. Stalin also held his road to socialism uniquely correct and saw all other paths as diversions from the principal line. Hitler mercilessly destroyed all his party comrades, such as Röhm and his followers, when they strayed from the correct path. Stalin also mercilessly destroyed all who strayed from the correct path. Hitler had a 4-year plan. Stalin had a 5-year plan. In Hitler's Germany, one party was in power, the others in jail. And in Stalin's Soviet Union, one party was in power, all others in jail. Hitler's party stood above the nation, and its leader ruled the country. Stalin's party also stood above the nation, and its leaders ruled the country. The most important holidays in Stalin's empire were May 1st and November 7th to 8th. In Hitler's empire, they were May 1st and November 8th to 9th. Hitler had the Hitlerjugend, young Hitlerists. Stalin had the Komsomol, the young Stalinists. Stalin's official title was Führer, leader.
Yeah.
Hitler's was leader. Stalin's was leader and Hitler's was Führer. In translation, they are identical. Stalin declared that the Russians were responsible for all the outstanding scientific and technological advances, the hot air balloon, the locomotive, the airplane, radio. Hitler claimed the same for the Germans. So you see, totalitarianism is a template, and of course this is where ideology is nonsense, but the template here is the function. This is how it works. And you see this with Putin or Xi in China or the Iranian mullahs. You see there is this similarity. You can trace them. Right?
Yeah, it's like,
this is quite brilliant by Suvorov, yeah.
And according to the internet cult, right, the anti-Semitic, we know it all conspiracy crowd, according to them, Putin had freed Russia of the influence of the windmills of Zion, right? I mean, he arrested some of these earlier oligarchs who really worked for the KGB in some form or another. But some Jewish background oligarchs, they were incarcerated or driven out of the country. And then, of course, the Putin cult got into full gear. And so, according to the internet logic, that country has been cleared of Jewish influence. Well, maybe, this thing going on with the Chabad movement being still active in Russia, and that confuses a lot of people on the internet. They get really crazy when that topic gets brought up because they don't understand it. But besides that, the internet believes that the windmills of Zion, the elders of Zion, have been driven out of Russia, right? According to the internet. But what do we see in Russia today? It's the most crazy amount of greed you can imagine, right? It's like these Russian KGB guys, worked, were in Putin's judo class a few generations ago, a few decades ago, and everybody was stealing everything. Everybody wanted to have like the biggest palace and spend more money and have the luxury limousines shipped in, and the luxury airplanes and more money and more jewels and more of everything. It's the biggest amount of it's like pure greed. But according to the internet, Jews invented greed. Jews are all about greed, and Jewishness and greediness is one and the same thing, according to the internet. How do you explain the situation in Russia for the last couple of decades now? And it's the same with other places in history. You mentioned Nazi Germany. The Nazi leadership was so greedy. I mean, they let everybody else live in terrible conditions, but the Nazi leadership, they always wanted the new Mercedes, they always wanted the bigger palace, and build even bigger palaces, and build a whole new capital city, and have like the biggest palaces ever, bigger than anybody else's palaces, and waste all that money. It was such a greedy, petty leadership that the Nazis had. And then if you go back and you look at some of these African, these little African empires.
Well, there's no corruption like African nations' corruption. Some of the worst in the world.
Even hundreds of years ago,
the Nazis were terrible.
Yeah,
very corrupt.
Even hundreds of years ago. This was right when, or shortly before, the Europeans came to Africa and initially asked these African kingdoms to buy slaves, and these African rulers said, "Sure, how many do you need?" And so these Europeans, they looked at these African kingdoms and saw a lot of parallels. I mean, cult-like, just like we Europeans used to do it. Very cult-like, very greedy. You had a king in these African territories like the Congo or some of these other places. You had a king, and then you had these princes below him, or these other aristocrats below him. The king needed those guys, but so he needed to keep them happy and keep bribing them with luxury items so they would be loyal to the king. And there were rules like you couldn't watch the king eat or drink. If you actually observed the king eat or drink, you would get the death penalty. So it was like an insane cult. Look at Middle America, so like Mesoamerica or South America. The the older empires, like the Aztecs, the Incas, and some of these other empires, vicious cult-like empires and greedy as heck. They would, the leadership would take everything and bamboozle the masses, and it was so bloody. And they had like these public events where they would, publicly kill a bunch of people in a big ceremony, and make skull towers, with human skulls and cement. People are digging these up still to this day, these huge structures, these skull towers. It was everywhere without any Jewish people, right? I mean, without any Jewish people in Africa.
You go to, there's a famous story Joseph Conrad wrote called The Heart of Darkness. And it's told by the sailor, one of sort of an alter ego of Joseph Conrad. Joseph Conrad was a ship's captain, and he did command a steamer on the Congo. And so this might have been something that happened to him or something close. And Marlowe is telling this to a bunch of seamen sitting on a ship anchored in the Thames. And so it's about going up the Congo on this riverboat and hearing about this Kurtz, who's there's the outer station where, of course, there's terrible slavery, the French and so on, and others are exploiting the natives. There's Africans being left to die, and they're treated very badly. But there's the inner station where this Kurtz is running things, and he's a brilliant ivy trader, trading in ivory trader. There's a brilliant future. He's a Belgian. Of course, the Congo is the Belgian Congo. And of course, they have to go in and get him because there's these stories of massive horrors going on in the interior, and they got to bring him back. And of course, when they meet Kurtz, he's made himself into a kind of white emperor of these Africans. And he's lost interest in the ivory altogether. He stopped sending it out. He's just having fun being a god emperor over these primitive people. And of course, it's fascinating because you find out, of course, Kurtz dies of malaria on the way out. But there's the final scene where Marlowe meets with Kurtz's fiancée in Belgium, and that his ambition was to lead a future. He was trying to make his fortune. He was trying to get rich and make his fortune leading a political party. So you think of Hitler, you think of this savagery and you think of Hitler. It's kind of a force. And this is a novella that was written very early on in the 20th century.
Yeah, so wherever you look, the template seems to have been the same. And it's I think it's part of growing up, it's part of becoming an adult to understand how the game is played. Because it's like you can always blame some boogeyman, right? And you can always blame some outside force that polluted us and turned us bad and brought the greed to us, brought these sins, this sinful behavior to us, and by brutality and some weirdo idea of magic, we're supposed to, we are expected to drive out the evil. I mean, it's like the worst form of superstition, when the empires have always used the same template. They've always used the same template, and the template is never going to change unless we change. It's also part of becoming an adult. It's also part of growing up to take the initiative and take responsibility, and become more sophisticated in your thinking, in your communicating, and how you interact with other people. Whom do you give power? What person are you following? And with this, in this current situation, I mean, the American administration, I think, when they play their cards right, the American administration is sitting pretty. They can react or sometimes preemptively act, like they've done with Iran. and just have the dosage just right, just about right. Not another forever war, not another entanglement with hundreds of thousands of boots on the ground in some desert country, but just do something here, do something there, and have the dosage just right. And still, even if the American administration now and the next administration, when they're doing things just right, even if they're doing things just right timing, right amount of force at the right spot, not too much, not too little, a lot of people are still going to be hopping mad, and we have to think ahead now, because we've seen it when people became superstitious and they started to create chaos, right? When people thought, let's go with the most radical group that we have, because nothing else seems to function. And I think that at this stage, anti-Semitism, this conspiracy movement, I think the most they can do at this point is just to start burning things down and just cause a certain amount of trouble. Not too much trouble, but a certain amount of trouble. And I think this is why the government is now using Palantir products and scanning through everything, because they want to understand who is caught in the cult, who's caught in the cult movement. And I think that as long as people are cult-like but still go along with a Republican administration, I think that's still okay for the U.S. government. But the moment people, according to their actions and behaviors and according to the software, people who are going to turn ultimately against the U.S. government, I think those will be targeted. And they can be targeted in a smart way, so as not to fulfill seemingly these predictions that have been around forever, since like the Oklahoma City bomber, when he said 30-something plus years ago, and he said the New World Order is going to come quickly, and the United Nations tanks are going to roll around America, and they're going to put all the patriots in camps. I think they can target. They can have targeted operations against the crazies, the cult members, and play it smart, in the future, and not have mass roundups like some people thought was going to happen.
Well, there's always this danger of turning to this totalitarian model, and this is one of the concerns I have with the Dark Enlightenment people and Nick Land and Curtis Yarvin. And there is, look, the middle versus the extremes. You got to be wary of the extreme left and the extreme right. You really do. So anyway, I think we've covered a lot of the news, Alex, and I want to thank you for being with us here, folks. So this has been Friends and Enemies. I'm Jeff Nyquist, my co-host Alex Benesch in Germany, and I thank you for joining us.